Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And firstly, can I just acknowledge the history lesson from the member opposite Mr. Henare. It was a good reminder, I guess, that there have been times in New Zealand where things have been less than ideal, and hopefully as we continue to improve things right across history now, we can make sure that some of those things don't ever happen again, and we can have legislation that will be good for New Zealand. And this, Mr. Speaker, as I said in the first reading, is good legislation for New Zealand, because paramount at the very height behind this legislation is the protection of New Zealanders, to keep them as safe as we possibly can be, in this instance from people who are returning from overseas who have been deported because of their criminal behaviour. And there is an expectation, as I said in the first reading speech, that New Zealanders can expect that we would have the similar sorts of provisions in place for people who have been serving time overseas as those who have been serving time in New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, there's been, I guess, I would expect there to be anyway, a certain level of concern about people's civil rights in this kind of legislation. But I think ultimately we've got to find that balance between people's civil rights and safety. And I think it's important to highlight that this regime is only going to apply to offenders returning to New Zealand within 6 months of being released from custody. So we're not talking about those people who perhaps are just being deported for issues of character. We're not just talking about those people who've had issues with speeding fines or otherwise. But, Mr. Speaker, we are very much targeting those people who have committed crimes that have had custodial sentences attributed to their crime. And so what we now need to do is have something in place to ensure that if they are going to be returned to New Zealand, whether it's against their will or otherwise, that we reintegrate them in the best possible way we can, and that is exactly what this bill sets out to do. And so, Mr. Speaker, I commend it to the House.
The Honourable David